Okay, we're in our new shop, and the very first thing I need to do is create an office for me to stay in and work in. So, let's get busy and let's build a room. Now what we have here in this little box right here is the restroom. We have a sink, toilet, now install a shower, raised up a little bit with a yacht sump pump to dump the excess water into the toilet whenever I take a shower. And what I think I'm going to do is come out about the length of a bed and square it off to this wall right here, installing a closet door and an entry door and keeping it on this side of the fuse box. I believe this little square right here is roughly 10 feet tall, so we're going to connect up to that 10-foot tall one to create a roof coming all the way back here, and this will be the office. So the first thing we need to do is lay out the grid on the floor with some masking tape, make some measurements, figure out how many studs we need to buy, and go to the store and grab supplies. Okay, so the plan is we're going to make 3 very simple interior walls. There's not going to be any wiring or any plumbing, no vents, no nothing in them. Just strictly interior walls to support drywall and keep the air in so that I can air condition it. Now, I'm not going to have to put insulation in it, I don't believe, because this entire warehouse is insulated and it's somewhat of a building in a building that I can just keep a little bit of it heated and air conditioned at certain times of the year. We are basically going to put a short 9-foot wall right here, and that's just a wall to hold up drywall. A slightly more complicated wall going all the way back to the siding right there. Now, unfortunately, I cannot anchor against that wall. It's not very structurally sound, so I'm going to have to put a third wall this way, because this wall is just totally wonky. Not straight up and down. And then we will put a roof on the top. Its only job will be hold up drywall. Very simple. The only complex aspect of it is I'm going to have to put one door there and cut out a recess for an air conditioner. On the interior, we are going to put a 8-foot wall right here, and that will leave a 2-foot gap along the top for air to circulate in, and this will be my little room right there with my office and the restroom going on. For material, I'm just using 2x material. Now, I am kind of surprised. We are in Bastrop, close to Bastrop, Texas right now, which is Pine Central, and we got a lot of whitewood here. I was expecting yellow pine, but it is what it is, and it'll be behind drywall, so who really cares? I bought 25 2x10s, and if you remember, the bathroom is 10 feet tall. The problem, though, is that used metal studs, so it is a very precise 10 feet tall, and we are going to have a base and a top rail on the walls, so I'm going to have to cut each one of these down about the thickness of 2 of the boards to get it to all work right. But no big deal, that's to be expected. I bought 25 2x10s. I bought 2 2x16s, but I only need 14 feet of them, and they will be for the base and top rail for the long wall. And then I have a bunch of 2x8s, and 2x is a little shorter than 8 feet from my last office that I deconstructed so that I could save a little money and reuse that material. So, that's what we're going to be using. For joinery, I have some 12D nails. I know you're supposed to use 16D nails, but this is an interior, non-stressed unit. This will be fine. And I also like to use deck screws on the sides when I'm joining 2 walls together to a post made up of 2 2x4s screwed together as opposed to nails, because they don't come apart as easy, and that's not a stress joint up and down, so it'll be strong enough for that. Plus, in future storage, when I build storage, we'll be using this box of screws anyways. So this way right here is why I need a master. Normally you would have a bump stop at the very end to stop your stuff in so you could get consistent cuts, but obviously this is a lot longer than any kind of bump stop I could do. I mean, it is a little less than 10 feet long. So I need something that I can mark off all the other boards so that they're all the same exact size. So we create a master. So here we go. Let's create a quick master. Shop back on. Make sure you are on the right side of the line. Now this is just carpentry, but as a fine woodworker, I like to stay on the right side of the line and use it. And there we go. We have our master. What? Did you think that was going to be the master? No, all these boards are 10 feet, so all I need is this little doodad right here, and I can mark off how much I'm going to be cutting off. These are fairly consistent on their length for the manufacturer. We just need it to be off-cut. My master. Now in my design, I've accounted for a little bit of slop, a little bit of leeway in some of the walls, and this is being one of them. But if I want it to be square, I have to make sure that the top plate and the bottom plate are dead on equal. The length might vary a little bit, and that's where my slop is. But to make them dead on equal, well, the easiest thing I know to do is just flush up the ends and cut them at the same time. That just so happens to be why most of these 10-inch chop saws can resaw this exact size, so you can cut two at once. Now on the top plate, a lot of people put a double plate on it. For now, I'm just going to use a single board, a single plate instead of doubling up. I'll probably double up later on after it's assembled so that I can link them all together. But for now, I'm just going to get these two exactly the same size. The next thing I do when I'm building a wall is simply because I'm lazy. I will turn the studs on their sides, and then I will mark out my locations every 16 inches. Now, you put studs every 16 or 24 inches. You want to know why? Because our our drywall is 4 feet across. So 16, 32, 48, 4 feet. It gives you one sheet of plywood between your studs. Some people will do it 24 between centers. I typically just do 16 because it gives me more spots to put nails in. So what I do is I will mark it out. Now here's a strange thing. If you want to be able to push up the drywall on the stud, if you are not going to be bumping your wall up against a post in the middle to join them, you have to offset it a little bit on that first one so you can get a little bit of stud on the drywall. Me, I'm doing a different style, so I'm just going to go straight 16 inches on center all the way across. Except for the very first one, which I will do at 3/4 of an inch, because that's going to be the first stud. Oh, and because once again I hate math, notice I bought the rulers that have the red markers every 16 inches. Makes it a little bit easier. Mark them all at the same time, and I transfer the mark. I would go all the way down, and I just transfer the mark with my square. That way I know whenever I line up the stud, if I put it in the middle, drive nails in there, it will all be square. I know not much of anything is actually going to be square whenever you're doing construction lumber, but there's one dimension I do want to get somewhat straight. And that's this front wall going in front of the restroom to the rest of the warehouse. I would like that to be a nice continuous wall with no visible creases, because that's going to be the backdrop for a lot of my filming, and I'm going to be putting my tool racks on this wall. So I want it to appear to be at least somewhat straight. So I need to line this wall up with that one, but I'm not going to put it right on the edge because I have to leave room for drywall, and I'm just going to be using 1/2 inch drywall on this. So I'm going to mount the wall exactly a 1/2 inch back, but I also want to keep it somewhat straight. So what I've done is I put this 2x14 against the wall as best I could. And if you look down there, you can see even that wall is not straight. And I'm just going to strike a line with a piece of chalk on the concrete. And I know that whenever I put this wall down, I need to be about a 1/2 inch behind this piece of chalk. Now that I have that chalk line, I know exactly how long to make the wall going to the back. Do you see a pattern here in how I work stuff? Just like in furniture making, I don't really make measurements with a tape measure that often. I take measurements directly off the piece. Well, here and now, just to make it more accurate, I'm not depending upon my math skills in a tape measure. I'm taking measurements directly off the piece. Okay, so we have our first 2 walls built. I left an opening right there that will later be for a door. And I will cut out the bottom section as I put the door in, and I'll frame it when the wall is up. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this wall right here. Now, because the bathroom is made out of steel studs, I'm going to have to use metal screws going through the drywall into that stud, and I'm going to set the wall back exactly a 1/2 inch so that when I put drywall on it, it will flush up with the next wall and make mudding it a lot easier. After which, you will see me attach 2 full-length 10-foot boards to the end of that wall using screws. And I like using screws for that because it's not a downward force, it's a compression force. And it will anchor those to it, and that will give me some wood to attach the next wall to stand that one up. And that will form an L, which should be good enough to freestand until I finish the back wall. And we'll get started on that next. Okay, so now we have the wall attached to the 2 studs that are going to allow me to join the second wall to it. And whenever I create the L, this will be a lot more stable, and it'll go on from there. So now it's just to lay a bead of caulk or adhesive down on the concrete and put the second wall up. Now we've got the 2 walls secured. They've got adhesive on the bottom. Well, not that big a deal. It's not going to do that much. But that wall right there is secured against the bathroom. So this is very structurally sound this way. But because I can't attach to that wall right there, and this isn't going to form a real box than how we've got designed, it has a little flex going on right here. Can you see that? We knew that was going to happen coming in. Now, you can normally attach drywall to this, and because drywall is square, you got a bunch of nails in it, that strengthens it up a little bit, but maybe I've got a little prejudice against drywall. I have a better solution. My solution is OSB. It's a little bit stronger than drywall, and it'll take a little bit more abuse. I'll eventually just put a skim coat of mud on the outside and paint it, and nobody will know it's OSB, but I can also drill into it. I like the fact that because I'll have screws in all these studs, it's going to get a lot of structural stability this way and that way. Plus the fact that it's got a perfect 90 degrees here from the factory, so all I have to do is kind of shift the wall a little bit before I screw it in and make that perfectly plumb. I know this is perfectly plumb this way because it's anchored against that wall, and it turned out pretty good. The downside to using OSB is the smell. It does have formaldehyde and all those chemicals in it, and they will be outgassing for quite a while. But I'm in an open warehouse. I leave the doors open, so it's not that big a deal. Me personally, I probably wouldn't use this too much on the interior of a house, but most homes, the subfloors are all made of this stuff anyway, so you're probably familiar with it, whether you're meant to be or not. So, use OSB and drywall, and that'll give a lot more stability. Now, to make my life easier, I'm securing a cross beam just as a temporary hold to make sure that this wall is plumb for the rest of the build. Okay, we're almost done with framing. We've got one more wall to go along this back edge, and then just kind of a partition wall in the middle, and then I will frame out 2 doors and add an air conditioning unit. But this next wall is a little bit of a headache for me because I have this breaker box, and it's extended against the wall, but the wall is kind of warpy. It's bowed like that because of this is not really attached to anything. So what I'm going to do to make life easier on me and to use more full dimensional lumber is I'm going to build a very basic straight up wall like I've done before, and then this little section right here I will work on separately and attach it to these 2 walls. So it'll be like 2 walls joined in the middle. So let's build that first basic wall first, and then I will tackle this part right here. Okay, here we go. As I said earlier, I was going to have an issue with this section right here. I'm not too happy with my solution, but it's going to work, and really all this is ever going to do is hold up drywall. So what I did was I just built a very simple wall every 16 inches like I showed you before, going all the way back to this back section. And in here I built a separate little wall right underneath this, and I've screwed it to this side and this side, so it kind of anchors everything together. And I have a little box right here that is in plane with this one right here just to hold up drywall. Now there is an opening right here where they are not connected, but once I put the roof on, I will connect it with a cross beam going sideways, and that will strengthen it all up there. So let me show you what I'm going to do for the roof. As you can see with the roof, I'm just laying 2x4s flat. Now, this is not the perfect setup. If somebody was to walk up there, it would hold somebody my size, 200, 250 pounds, fairly easy because I got a lot of wood going across there. And basically, that's just anchoring this wall to that box right there. Now, above me is about 12 feet. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not too worried about it because really, above that is only about 1.5 feet to the ceiling. Nobody's ever going to be crawling up there. So its only purpose is to hold up the ceiling and maybe one light. And that is more than strong enough for that. I mean, it is overkill for that application. And plus, I will take spray paint all along the top and write, "Do not walk" on these areas. Like anybody can stand up there anyways, just for safety's sake. But after that, we will install this interior wall, and I will be done with framing and ready to install doors. So I now got the roof in. It's fairly sturdy. It'll be enough to hold up drywall. And as you can see, I had a diagonal one of them because to join up that one wall I was talking about earlier. It looks like crap, but it's just for drywall, and nobody's ever going to be up there. Before I put the ceiling on, I will move that one light. But now to framing up the doors. So this is the beginning of day 3 of my build. I still have to do one interior wall and install the framing for the doors and the AC. But because I'm transitioning shops and here, I'm going to have to kind of break up this day a little bit and move all my stuff from my temporary storage area into here, just get it in here. And I'm going to try and clear off some of the drywall I purchased earlier. So I'm going to take a quick break from the framing. I'm going to put up some of the drywall on some of these walls, just get it off the floor and out of the way. So here's how I like to do drywalling. Now one quick note. Whenever you read in the books to put up drywall, they always tell you to put this first stud up from the side of the wall at 15.25 inches. That's because these 2x4s are actually 1.5 inches. Half of that is 3/4 of an inch. So if you were to offset it just back half a board, whenever you put up drywall, you will be splitting one of these boards and have something to nail into. But the thing is, I'm not that good a nailer, so I like to have 2 boards in here. So that's why I offset mine directly at 16 inches. And then every 4 feet, I put up a scrap board. This is one of the boards I took down from my last place. It's just scrap board. So it'll cost you an extra, what, $2 every 4 feet to put an extra board in there. And that will give me one solid board to put my nails in. So I'm a little bit more accurate that way. Now, 3 quick notes of stuff I like to do. I prefer putting my drywall up as tall as possible instead of laying on the side, because when you lay on the side, you have to pick the other piece up and rest it on it. And this way it gives me to the 8-foot height and I can rest on the ground, so it's less stress on my back. It's called being lazy. Second, if I'm doing a ceiling, which I will do in a second, I will do that first, because I believe that the drywall coming up to the ceiling, the piece coming up underneath it will help support it a little bit. Hold a little bit of weight. Not that much, but that's just the way I like to do it. And I find mudding's a little bit easier that way. Third is when I'm doing walls, I don't use screws. I've had to deconstruct 2 homes to rebuild them, and they use screws, and it's just a real pain to pull out all the screws. Eventually you just get your saws on and saw them off. I prefer using nails, because when you're tearing apart the walls, you can either just pound them into the stud after you pull the drywall off, or really quickly pull them out with a claw hammer. So I use nails on the walls going in instead of drywall screws. The cool thing I like about the nails is that they are domed on the top. They're not crowned, so that when you mud it, it goes on very easily. Plus it pierces the drywall a little bit. Plus the fact that when you're using your hammer, because there's so much space right here, you're not going to punch through, especially when you are working against a stud like this. So there's a little bit of a depth stop in your hammer. So it just seems to work out pretty well. So, putting it up, I register it against the bottom, shove it against whatever side wall it's going against, make sure it's good and tight, grab your nail, line it up with a 2x4, and just tack it down. Nice and flush, easy to mud. Here's a quick tip I use quite a bit, because I have a hard time lining up studs. So if you hold your hammer and you got your studs fairly upright, gravity will make a straight line. So I just put my hammer where the old nails of the window stud is, and that will line me up. Helps me find that stud fairly accurately. Just let gravity do your work. Another quick tip when drywalling. Don't be afraid to be wasteful. Use full sheets when you can. Drywall, relatively speaking, is cheap. You'll save a lot more time when you're mudding and painting and doing all the trim work than trying to piece together a bunch of small pieces. Use full pieces when you can. Okay, it's Monday morning. I'm not quite sure how many days I've got invested in this. I want to say I'm at the beginning of day 3, but since starting this project last Tuesday, I've had to move all my stuff out of the temporary storage because the gentleman had a surprise customer that needed to lease it the next day. And I've also worked for art markets and stuff like that. So we've got the outside all drywalled and somewhat finished, just cosmetic and mudding and painting after that. And I'm going to take a quick break today, and I've decided I am going to do a little bit of electrical work. I'm going to move that light right there up in the middle section so it serves a purpose. And I decided to add some lighting inside just to make it a little bit easier. And that's not going to be in the scope of this project I'm doing in the video, but I'm going to take a quick break today and we'll get back to the rest of the interior tomorrow. Okay, today I'm going to be doing the drywalling, and if you're doing drywalling by yourself, just bite the bullet and go to one of the big box stores or rental yard and rent yourself a drywall lift, especially if you're doing 10-foot ceilings. You don't want to be carrying that stuff up there on your back and kind of bouncing and screwing. I want to say this one was only about $40, so it's well worth the money for a day's rental to do it out. Now, be warned, a lot of these big box store rental guys, they don't really know what they're doing. Not to be rude or anything, but it's true. Some of these come with extra parts. I actually went to 3 different locations this morning to get this one. I started at 8 o'clock and it's 1 o'clock already, and just to find a rental unit, because First one was missing these pieces. Then I called a rental place, a professional tool rental place, and they had one that was just massive. It was about a 300-pound unit. There's no way I could have lugged that in and out of the back of my truck. And this is what I've used in the past. So the third big box store, the Orange Company, they had one that had all the parts in it, and that's what I've rented so far. It goes together fairly easily. It lifts the tiles up to the ceiling, so all you have to do is position it and screw them in. Makes life a lot easier, and the work will go a lot quicker. Also, as I mentioned earlier, when drywalling, I like to do the ceilings first because I have a feeling that having that drywall up against the wall with the next piece coming up, it kind of adds a little bit extra support. And when I'm doing ceilings, I definitely use wood screws. It just makes things a lot easier than banging upside down, and I think it has a little bit better hold than nails. Even the old houses I've done restoration on, the ceilings were screwed in. So today we are going to put up this partition wall and frame out one interior door, and then I'm going to frame up a door right here with a frame for the AC unit above so that we can have a nice air-conditioned little office for us. My one issue is the previous part of this one, the bathroom, was framed out with metal studs. So I need to attach to that wall, and I'm just going to attach to the drywall, through the drywall into the metal studs, and I need to use a self-tapping sheet metal screw so that it will go through. And it's a good solid joint right here. But in doing that, I am using a lot of my furniture making skills. This relative measurement that I'm always talking about, there's no reason to grab out your tape measure if you don't need to. I want to use full sheets of 8-foot drywall on the outside, so I want to make this wall 8 feet tall, exactly. Which means with a cap board and a base board, these middle studs are exactly 8 feet minus the width of two 2x4s. Well, that board right there has to go all the way to base ground, because that's where the door is going to be. So it's exactly 8 feet minus one 2x4. So I literally took a 8-foot 2x4, put that on top, drew a line, and there's my base measurement. To position that board on the wall, I needed to leave a gap for the drywall. So this is the drywall I'm using. I literally lined it up with a face, took a pencil line, drew that one, and lined that up, the stud up with that. Easy peasy. Using your woodworking skills in construction does make things go a little bit quicker sometimes. Another trick to help me get a somewhat square room is I'm now going to take a measurement from the back wall to where the stud ends. 87.5 inches. And then periodically throughout, I'm going to make that same measurement using these lines in the floor as my guide, and then using a very straight 2x4, mark a line all the way across. That will give me a place to put adhesive on the ground and line up the baseboard or footboard to going up. From there, all I have to do is make it plumb, and I will get a somewhat square room. The chalk line also indicates where I need to put another second tall 2x4 so I can brace my wall, screwing it straight against those two solid 2x4s. And I got lucky in that my math on this, putting up this wall lined up just perfectly, so I only need the one stud. Now it's time for me to frame the door. Now I have one of these cheap pre-framed hollow core doors at the last place that I took out, and I wanted to reuse it here. So what I did was I took the measurement from the top of it, and I created the opening in this frame right here, exactly that width plus two 2x4s. I left about a 1/16 of an inch wiggle room, but it should be pretty tight. Actually, I think I left about 1/64 of an inch. I am going to basically take a measurement from the bottom of this to the top of this for the two 2x4s to go against these two rails. I can then nail this frame to those and then put a cross beam along the top and brace that up against the top. And that's what we're going to do now. Create a frame for my cheapo door. Once again, why measure when you got the piece already laid up for you? Okay, so what we have here is we have a brace 2x4 braced against the wall right there that goes straight all the way to the ground. Then we have the top of the door, and above that is a piece that connects straight to the rafter so that gravity or force gets transferred through the doors and not into the door. And that's why a lot of times when you have earthquake or something like that, they say go to the door jamb, because you know this is built so that the force goes down around the door jab and not straight on you. And we have the moment of truth. Yeah! Woo! It worked! There really is something using your woodworking skills and general construction. Look at that. Nice tight fit. Ready to screw in. Okay, I'm in casting light right now because I want to show you one other cool thing about using full sheets and being somewhat wasteful. When they design these sheets on the edges, they actually recess the edges a tad bit. So I'm in this raking light setup, so hopefully the camera will pick it up. In between these two is slightly recessed. And that's there for a reason, because whenever you mud it, the mud will fill that up and it will be a smooth blending right here. They do that on purpose. And when you cut a sheet, you don't get that slight recess. So whenever you add mud, there's a chance you're going to get a slight hump. That is another reason why I like using nails instead of screws. Because the nail head, as you can see, makes a slight dimple. It slightly compresses it, and that gives your mud a place to fill in and end up with a smooth finish. So today we're going to be mudding and painting. So let's get busy. Now it's time for me to start mudding up all these joints and filling the nail holes and stuff. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a professional mudder. I mean, this is an art form in itself, and my job is not going to come out very flat. In fact, after it's done, I'm going to put flat paint on it because flat paint tends not to reflect as many errors. But the general idea is when you are putting up your drywall, you want to get the joints as tight as possible, which there are a lot of spots of mine that are not, because the mud will fit into it a lot easier. You don't have to do as much taping and filling to make it something smooth. And I kind of use the same rules we use when we sand stuff. You start out with coarse, you go medium and fine. You see that a lot of times at woodworking, except when you're mudding, you start out with small, then you go to medium, and then you go to large. And the larger it is, the broader the smoothing action is, and you sand in between. It's really very, very simple to do. With the small one, all you're doing is trying to get as much mud on the wall and smooth it out and fill any joints. Then after this dries, you're going to go back and smooth it out with some kind of sanding joint, or some people will just use a wet sponge. Then you go up to the next mudding level, and the next mudding level, even though the brush is bigger, you're putting on a lot less mud because you're just filling in the small uneven spots the small one created. And then the final one, after you sand that back down, is a large one, and that just gets a final skim coat. So here we go, mudding up. And I will tell you, this is also why I like doing nails, because when the hammer hits and compresses the drywall a little bit, it makes a little recess, so it sure does make filling nail holes really, really fast. Okay, here we are in round 2. That first batch of mud where I just put it on really, really heavy to fill in the gaps and stuff because of my poor drywalling skills is up. And it is mainly dry, except for in the parts where I had big gaps and I had to fill in quite a bit. Remember, this stage we were just getting as much mud on the wall as possible to fill in the gaps and making it as smooth as possible with our small little metal scraper. And I do like metal. I like metal for all my palette knives. I'm going to be using plastic ones later on today simply because I can't find my metal ones because it's all packed up, because my shop's packed up. But this time I start out, I would come over and I would scrape as much as I can, getting all the little ridges off like that. And then you go back with some kind of sanding medium. And I just bought, since it's just a hallway and a little bedroom, I just bought one of these little plastics and just sand it down real quickly. And this is going to be messy, so I do suggest some kind of face thing, but get it smooth. Your objective is just to level it out a little bit. And now you go back, and I will put the mud on with this knife, and I use a wider, the medium plastic knife to smooth it out. And this is where you start blending everything. So today, going back and blend through. And it should dry a lot quicker because you're not really putting a lot of mud on. You're just smoothing everything out. Okay, so now this medium coat of mud is dry, and I'm going to now go back and sand off all the bits again, get them nice and smooth, and then I'm going to go with a fine coat, meaning a larger paddle, and it will take even less mud for it to fill in the last final gaps. And honestly, after sanding, this is probably good enough for this warehouse environment, but just to show you what the results will be like with the last coat, I'll do a little bit of it, not the whole thing. I don't want to waste too much time. Now the first coat, it took overnight to come close to drying. There were still spots that were still a little wet. This coat, because there is so much less mud being put on, it's more just smoothing it out now, it dried in a few hours. And the final coat should dry, within an hour or two, so that I can get into putting on some primer. So let's get busy. So we let that third coat dry overnight. Now just a quick sanding, and I'll go over all the walls like this, getting rid of any kind of blemishes I see, and then we'll put primer on it and see how we did. So as for painting, we all know I'm cheap, and I don't have much of a budget to spend on this one. So believe it or not, I'm going to spend more money. I'm actually, instead of just putting paint right on the walls, I am going to prime them, and I do this for a couple reasons. These little what do they call them? Primer and sealers, they're only about $12, where a can of paint is going to be about 20 bucks. And I found that raw drywall and the mud soaks up so much paint that it's actually cheaper to go ahead and put a base coat of this cheap stuff, let it soak in, cover up, and then you don't have to put as much of the higher dollar color paint on the walls. Also, I do not want to put a texture on these walls because that takes more time and more money. And it's quite obvious, I'm not a professional drywaller. There's imperfections all over the place. So I'm going to use a very thick mat with this cheap stuff, and that's going to create little bumps and stuff like that all over the place that will act somewhat like texture and cover up my poor drywalling skills. So let's get painting. I've got some primer here. I'm not going to prime the already painted walls because they're okay and they should just take the paint easy enough. Oh, and here's a quick tip. These rollers are pretty much disposable. They're $2, $3 each. But a lot of times you need a pause for whatever reason. You're going to be using the same color or the same kind of paint. Well, instead of having to wash them all out, here's what I do. I take these disposable bags you get at the grocery store, and if you just wrap it in there and squeeze out the air, it will stay nice and wet. So next time you want to paint, just take the wrapper off, and there you go. It'll be already a rock and roll. And whenever you need to remove them, I wrap it up and I take it out. I just pull it out, and it keeps my hands nice and clean. Just a quick little tip. Well, there you go. A little substructure within this warehouse for me to use as a air-conditioned office, a little place to crash my head and store some personal stuff. Now, the key thing I want you to get out of this was eminently doable. Anybody could do this kind of stuff. So if you have a little project you want to tackle, maybe adding a small room in your garage so you can have a private office, or maybe sectioning off a section of it so you can put an AC unit in your workbench inside so you can do the intricate joinery that you like doing with hand tools in nice air-conditioned area and do the milling and stuff out on the driveway. Hey, it's eminently doable. Just read some instructions online, find how to do stuff, maybe pick up a building code book if you need to, and have at it. Get busy. Get it done. Now in a later video, I will give you a full tour of the place. What I did do is in my personal little room, it's all finished, it's trimmed out, and I went and bought a couple package of those $35 carpet squares to lay down there, and I was kind of impressed with them. I'll do a video on how I did that later on when I get enough money to do this little section right here. I think it'll take me another 2 packages of that. I guess that's 75 bucks right there. or 70 bucks. And then I will add trim along the bottom to anchor that carpet down. Other than that, this place is pretty much done, ready to rock and roll. A lot of the trim is just recycled wood from other projects. I've been dragging around these shelves for 10 or 12 years, just reusing them over and over and over. They're ugly, but they're modular. And there you go. Just a nice little place for me. If you enjoyed this video, please tell your friends to subscribe. And I want you to remember one last thing. It's always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.